Michael Rectenwald is the recently retired professor of liberal studies at New York University. He's the author of some 9 books, including the Gulag Archipelago, that's the Google Archipelago, Springtime for Snowflakes, and most recently, Beyond Woke, the definitive explanation of the woke phenomenon. In addition to that, he's been involved quite recently in the start of a brand new online educational platform called American Scholars, which is offering a range of subjects that reject the current woke views. Professor Rectenwald is a prominent advocate of academic freedom and of free speech, and he's appeared regularly on a number of national TV networks. So, Michael Rectenwald, welcome to the podcast.
Hi there. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. And can we start by asking you can you tell us something about yourself? For example, the very first chapter of your book is interestingly titled, "I was a leftist NYC prof, but when I said the left was unhinged, colleagues called me a Nazi and treated me like a Russian spy." How did you get to this particular place today then?
Well, it was a bit of a circuitous route, I should say. I was, a full professor at NYU, and I was teaching courses in cultural history and history of science and academic writing, and so I became. I was a leftist too. I considered myself a Marxist actually. And I started becoming quite disturbed by a lot of the developments in the university system at NYU and everywhere else, really. One of the things that really ticked me off was they instituted this bias reporting hotline in which, students could report the bias infractions or microaggressions of their professors to this hotline. And and also there was just this whole upsurge of wokeness. This kind of, first of all, there was the election was going on between Trump and Clinton, and so there was this huge upsurge of safe spaces, also trigger warnings on syllabi. I'm sure you're familiar with what those are. Just a whole panoply, plus no platforming speakers. Anybody with a divergent view was basically shouted off the stage. So all this started to really irk me. And I saw academic freedom becoming jeopardized by it. And I just started tweeting about it on Twitter. And before you know it, I was interviewed by the student newspaper. They asked me if I was really an NYU prof, because I was tweeting anonymously. And I said yes, and I agreed to the interview. And after that interview, all hell broke loose because I was immediately coerced into a leave of absence, condemned by a committee called the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Group. And basically, they savaged my academic career. Why? Because I had dared to contravene the accepted orthodoxy. And likewise, they made my life miserable there. I was pushed into the Russian department. They moved my office to the Russian department, which was it's very poetic irony, because at that time there was all the Russia hysteria. And
you felt finally, like you trotted off into the gulag by the sound of it.
I was put in my own personal gulag. That's right. It was very much like that, because they isolated me. It was really kind of a complete, I was treated as nothing but a pariah. And meanwhile, I had been a really good, academia, you want to be a good citizen in your university. I was a good citizen, and this is the kind of treatment they gave me. And eventually I retired in 2019, really at the very moment that retirement became available to me. A day wasn't a day early. and I kind of had a settlement with them, and I left. So that's the end of that. And so since then, I've been writing independently. Basically, consider myself something of an intellectual entrepreneur. So it's given me a lot more freedom of discourse, you know, and I've been able to investigate things that I really had no time for, and also was kind of proscribed from doing based on, you know, the university strictures. But also, you know, I've branched into areas that I probably would have never written about, frankly. So it's very interesting development, and I'm doing fine. All that being said, I do better than I did when I was teaching, at least economically and otherwise, because I have autonomy, and I don't have to be basically persecuted on a regular basis by a very hostile social justice mob, really at NYU. And I fell out with the whole left. I had a fallout with the entire left. I said, that's it. I want nothing to do with any of it anymore. I was politically homeless at first, but now consider myself at least a civil libertarian, or sometimes uncivil, as some would say.
Do you still consider yourself left-leaning in the sense of your political allegiance or ideologies, or have you moved from that too?
Yes, I've emerged from that. I don't consider myself left-leaning at all.
So what are you?
I don't consider myself right-leaning either. I consider myself a dissident. So what would Solzhenitsyn have been called, or what could we call him when he, you know, basically defects from Soviet ideology? He's not a right winger, is he? I mean, I think he's a dissident. So, and even like people like Havel in Czechoslovakia, he wasn't really right wing, but he was a dissident. So I consider myself a dissident from the political orthodoxy, which is now since metastasized throughout the entire social body. We have it now infiltrating everything, including the military, and all of corporate America. So this whole ideology, which I saw coming, was really, what I saw happening was really a harbinger of things to come. And I saw that and started writing about it.
Over in the UK, where I am, I tend to think we're probably 5 or maybe even 10 years behind you. So I don't actually have the same kind of environment that you've just described. We don't have bias hotlines to inform on people. We don't have. Don't think I've come across trigger warnings. They may exist, but not in my realm. And similarly, although I've heard of them, and I've heard of them from people like yourself and others who've suffered from those kind of things. But tell me, what do you think is the state of the university today then, and how has it got into that position?
Well, I mean, I sort of follow some of the research trends. I stay abreast of that, and I got to say that at least in terms of the humanities and a good part of the social sciences, I consider it basically rot. That is to say, the kind of so-called research that's being done is merely a combination of sophisticated political propaganda and virtue signaling, really. It's all devolved into these 3 categories, or basically race and gender, 2 categories, and everything that has to be basically focused and fixated on that. And all the hiring is being done with reference to that. I saw this happen, and I was the head of a committee responsible for hiring a professor of writing, and I was the chair of this committee, and the person that I objected to one of the candidates that the other committee members wanted to push forward because she couldn't write. I mean, couldn't write a sentence. And this to me, I mean, I received an email from this person, and I hadn't seen such a botchery of the English language, even from first-year students. So, I mean, I thought, how can we hire somebody for teaching writing who can't write? I mean, absolutely not. So I was accused, because she was a Black female, I was accused of being a sexist and a racist for holding up the standard of being able to write in order to be a writing professor. And they drummed me out of that committee. That was kind of the beginning of the end, really, as I see it now. They drummed me out of that committee, replaced me with somebody else, hired the woman in question, and that was that. So I think that's kind of hiring that's going on, their promotion of unqualified people based on identity or ideology. That's really what the trend is. And and then these topics of research, everything has to be left leaning, first of all. And then not just left leaning, but outright leftist. And then also this kind of curtailment of inquiry, which I think is really terrible. This kind of narrow banding ideologically.
How did that get a grip in of all places in a university, which must, by its very nature, by its very ethos, welcome debate and discussion between different ideas? I mean, that's the
Yeah,
whole.
I mean, that's a really good question, and it actually that's a good question, and I'm actually, I've been trying to get a sort of a focus on my next book, which I think is going to have something to do with the long march through the institutions, but it'll be something like from academia to the military, or from academia to corporate America to the military. Effectively, I want to trace this whole development. How did this happen? I mean, there's a lot of pat answers to it. One of them is it started with the Frankfurt School and all that. I think that's, I'm going to look for more proximate causes, which I think have to do with the diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives that have been underway, and the sort of social justice ideology that took over, which I think is tyrannical. That's what I think. It has the seeds of totalitarianism in it. And I think that because the first thing they do is shut down speech that they don't like, and they do it on moral grounds they think are moral. I call it paramoral grounds. This isn't real morality, but it happened as the hiring became, as the university gained a foothold, the left gained a foothold in the university and just kept growing its numbers to the exclusion of any divergent views. And therefore, there's a lack of competition. So we don't have a Darwinian struggle for the best ideas, because many things are just eliminated at the outset. So there's not a fair competition. So the most patent nonsense gets passed off as worthy of credulity, and in fact gets put to the point where it becomes a sacred cow. And I'm just beginning to, I mean, I've thought about this quite a lot, but I'm just beginning to do some research into just what is this usurpation? How did this take place? Because as the American, the AAU, the American Academy of University Professors, or the American Association of Universities Professors, said in their very declaration of founding in 1915 that freedom of speech and academic freedom is antithetical to the prescription of a particular ideology that everyone must abide by. This is just antithetical to academic life. So we've had this institutionalization of an official ideology, and that has drummed out all competitors and made any other thinking anathema, really. So that's the short answer, I guess. I'll have more on that in the future.
It is ironical, though, isn't it? I mean, in the place where you would least expect there to be a conformity and an ideology imposed upon everybody, where you
Yeah.
expect there to be diversity of opinion. This is the place where it seems to have taken over first of all, which is
It's
really.
definitely where it took over first of all, and where it spread from. Because I think that the university system is something like it's a, to put it in some Marxist terms, it's an ideological state apparatus in a sense, and it propagates ideology that then is then disseminated throughout the social body through the fourth estate and then into the hoi polloi. And that's kind of a shorthand way of saying it's like, or a shorter hand way of saying it is to actually follow up with Mencius Moldbug, which is a very interesting writer who says it's kind of like a cathedral, where from which these statements ex cathedra come and are spread throughout, and they become effectively what is dominant ideology. But how the university became so averse to diversity of opinion, of diversity of perspective, I should say, is really quite a chilling tale, I think.
There is some fight back, though, isn't there? I know one of your
Yeah.
colleagues, Jonathan Haidt, has been responsible for the creation of the Heterodox Academy with this very
Yeah.
thing, the idea of heterodox ideas, oppositional ideas, which combat each other. And that seems to be quite successful. Did you have any connection with that or any?
Yeah, I had a connection with him and Heterodox Academy, and I don't want to be throwing cold water on it. I think it's a good idea, but I think that it's unfortunate that, in my opinion, it has become kind of like a clearinghouse, a sort of mediator between the social justice dogma and dogmatists, and then the dissidents. So it's kind of like it's kind of like, okay, here are the things you can say to the social justice left without becoming a pariah. I don't think that we should have that kind of a need to have such a vetting of opinion, such that or perspectives, such that we have to go through sort of like a mediator, right? It's kind of like a marriage counselor in effect. And I don't think the parties really are fit for marriage.
Yes, that might make a rather difficult relationship, I would think.
Yeah.
Tell me about American scholars then. How does that work and what's its purpose?
American Scholars, it was founded in order to create a woke-free, we say pro-American education. And what do we mean by pro-American is not some sort of a jingoism or something, but that
It sounds
it actually.
very parochial from my side of the Atlantic.
Sure, of course it does. But let's take it in terms of what the principles of the founding were. I think that's the issue, and that's what we're trying to uphold. So that means freedom of speech, free inquiry, open inquiry and debate. We're not prescribing any particular ideology, and we don't bar any views. If we had a bunch of social justice warriors join, they'd be more than welcome to voice their opinions and their perspectives. This is not what we're trying to do. We're not trying to replace one ideological hegemony with another. We're simply trying to open up the conversation and to create classes that are free from indoctrination. Some of the things that have been most distorted in the academy are, for example, American history. And then, of course, there is, with the 1619 project you've probably heard about, in which it's suggestive of the idea that the very founding principles of the US are racist to the core, and everything about the Constitution, it's a racist creed, in effect. This is just lunacy. I mean, this is just not historical. This is so ahistorical, it's ridiculous. This is looking at the history of the US through this most bizarre ideological prism, really. And we're going to correct that. So we're beginning with like a core, what I'm calling American core. And those courses consist of American history, courses on the free market as opposed to command and control economies, courses on free speech in connection with the internet too, courses on the founding principles, and then we're going to grow from there. That's kind of like the American core, and then we will deal with everything else that we can. Largely humanities based first, and then I plan on adding social sciences and the hard sciences. And so we're looking at trying to develop a whole curriculum. But can you imagine putting a whole curriculum together?
Well,
it's quite a task. It's very onerous. I mean, we're looking at it's a difficult project, but we're beginning with this. We're trying to make it coherent. So we begin with this American core and then aggregate from there.
and could anyone join this from any country? Is it exclusively American?
Any country can join it. This is not exclusive to Americans. That's why I say, when we say pro-American, we mean pro-American values, and that is the values of the founding, which anybody can subscribe to, and that frankly we believe should be the principles that are held everywhere, because we believe in individual rights.
And what about leading towards a qualification? Have you got that in mind, or is that part of it?
What we're looking at is creating certificate programs where you take a cluster of courses, demonstrate proficiency to the professor's standards, and then get a certificate in that area. We're not looking at accreditation at this juncture because, first of all, this is a racket, I think, at least in the US it is. These accreditation institutions and the universities are kind of bedfellows, and they have interest in, they're kind of like a cartel together. We're looking to compete in the open market by saying, look, this is what we offer. Here's our certificates, and they should have value in the world. And we think they could have, we think they will have a legitimating function, because that's what really a degree is partly, right? It's a legitimating function. It has a legitimating function. So I think that would be part of it, a certificate programs.
Is this sort of come out of the kind of debacle that people like Brett Weinstein and people at Everclear College were?
Evergreen, yeah.
Is that where this is coming from? Because
yes, very much so. Very much so. And my own experience and many others and other dissident voices, not all American. Canadian is largely Canadian, actually. Most of the dissident academics over here on this side of the pond are mostly Canadians. Americans have been very reticent to be to voice anything, and so there's we're in the spirit of Jordan Peterson and Gad Saad and others. In fact, I've asked Peterson to teach, and we'll see whether he takes me up on it.
I've heard Peterson say similar things to what you've said, that the institutions and certainly the humanities are all quite corrupt at the present time, and that he was also thinking of starting up some kind of alternative university online, but I don't think it's got very far.
No, he hasn't gone anywhere with that. That's why I asked him to come aboard. I haven't gotten a response. I mean, he's a very busy guy, and he's also quite in demand. So I know that that's a reach, but I would be remiss if I haven't tried. We are on a similar, we're on an email list together of dissident profs, and we've spoken together a couple times, and so it's possible.
Kindred spirits, by the sound of it, in that
sense.
Yeah. Tell me, it's not just universities, it's also or campuses, it's also corporations which seem to have been swallowing this up. And in fact, it seems to me that this is where the real power of woke lies. If it was just a few people espousing some ideas which we could disagree with, there wouldn't be a bit of a problem with that. But I think the fact that corporations will champion these and will sack people if they're Twitter feed has shown something remiss 5 years ago, or something
Yeah.
your job's on the line. How did corporations get so wrapped up in it?
Well, that's a great question, and that's in that book that you're holding, Beyond Woke. I talk about that in several essays. I have a theory about it. It's my theory. It may be wrong, but I think positing a theory is fine, and if it's wrong, it's wrong. But I think these are monopolists when it comes down to it, and so what they're trying to do is use ideology as a sort of shall we say, like a kind of shibboleth, or a kind of entry ticket into the corporate monopolistic cabal, if you will, and to eliminate competitors using ideological criteria for discrimination. So, for example, BlackRock Inc., which is the largest asset investment firm in the world, is fully woke, and they have Larry Fink, their CEO, wrote a letter to basically all the top CEOs in the world, saying, in effect, you must abide by these precepts, their environmental precepts, their social justice precepts, and their governance precepts. And so you must be a believer and responder to the dominant narrative about climate change. B, you must be promoting social justice ideology in your workplace and in the hiring process. And C, you must cooperate with governments in the way that we're suggesting. And otherwise, we will direct investments away from you. That's basically what he said.
And why? Well, why is this narrative so central to their mission?
Well, this is where we get into speculation, right? Because I would have to say that I'm not sitting in on these board meetings, and I can't, I haven't got an ear to I'm not a bug on the wall. My guess is, I think, like I said, these people are trying to create a kind of monopolistic system in which you have a kind of corporate oligarchy and then to get rid of all of these kind of middling producers and create a two-tiered system, in effect, so that you have approved producers on the one hand, and then they get rid of all these other competitors. It's a means of destroying competition. It's an anti-free market move.
But the thing I have difficulty in understanding about these companies is, I mean, take for example, they've had big campaigns for Nike, the sports people, and you've also had Gillette razor blades. They've put out adverts which have been very woke, and all it seems to have done is divide their customers into two groups: those people who are not going to buy Gillette anymore, and those who are. Why would you alienate half your customer base, or a good proportion of it anyway?
Well, there's a couple things there. First of all, they consider the coastal elites in the US to be their primary targets, or the urban elites around the world, or the urbanites, and they're effectively saying, we don't care. I mean, in Starbucks, for example, basically said, look, their CEO sent out a message. It's been a while, but probably a year. If you don't believe in gay rights, trans rights, and so forth, don't even buy our coffee. We don't want you. So that's pretty divisive, right? So they're saying this is the prescribed ideological, this is the litmus test.
It sounds like they're more addicted to virtue signaling than they are to their profits.
Yes, but if they get rid of competitors, see, monopoly is very profitable in its a way. So I think this is a means of getting rid of competitors. I talk about that in Beyond Woke in a couple essays. I also talk about it at great length in Google Archipelago. And see, it's funny you mentioned Gillette, because King Camp Gillette, who founded the company, was a socialist, and he had this idea of creating a world corporation that would eliminate all competition, that would subsume all production and be the producer of every existing item in the world. And he thought competition was the real enemy. So And then everything was like one corporation, everybody would have equal shares in the corporation, and that would socialism. Capitalism was the object. So there has been this kind of leftist corporatism for a long time. This is what people, and especially the left, don't understand. There is a left of capital, as the Marxists would put it. That is to say, left corporatism or left capitalism that has always been attempting to push this kind of leftist view. And largely, it's a weird amalgam of capitalism and socialism, where you have these capitalist producers, but you have everyone else sort of on the ground under socialism.
Is this the way that corporations justify to themselves their capitalist tendencies?
I think that's part of it. Absolutely, it's a part of a self-apologetics. In other words, they're saying, look, we can deal with our own enormous wealth by virtue of holding an ideology that is effectively, leftist and therefore good, and this way they absolve themselves of guilt. It's a kind of an absolution ideology. It works kind of like a confessional in the Catholic Church.
Yeah. Tell me, in your understanding, has critical race theory also taken a grip in corporations as much as it has done in universities?
Absolutely. It's through and through these corporations. Critical race theory, they're training people, and you have to take this kind of training. They call it sensitivity training, racial sensitivity training, but really that's a Trojan horse for critical race theory, because everything in these training sessions are telling you basically the precepts of critical race theory. That is, you live in a systemically racist society. You are a racist because you live in a systemically racist society. Oh, by the way, the society is systemically racist because you're a racist. So it's a tautology, of course. But that's how this is what they're training people to believe. You have participated in racism, whether you know it or not. This attitude is so deeply embedded that it's inscrutable. You can't even locate all the racism in your thinking or in your behavior and your intuitions. Your very core is racist. I mean, your very intuitional substratum is a racist substratum. I mean, you're just a racist through and through. And once you admit this, that's first of all, admitting it is the entry to being able to work there. And resisting it is more proof that you're a racist.
Sounds like a catch-22 situation.
Totally, absolutely catch-22. You can't win. If you win, you lose, and that is, if you declare yourself a racist, obviously you are, declaring yourself a racist. If you say, listen, I'm not a racist, I don't believe these things, and I hold people to be I treat people as individuals, and that's race. That means that's even more sign that you're a racist, so you can't win. That's right.
I think that as someone who teaches science and scientific method, it immediately strikes me that that's a non-falsifiable position. It's a very unscientific position. You can't argue it one way or the other. You can't defeat it anyway, because there's no evidence which you could show which would overturn it. Even if you could demonstrate evidence, it wouldn't be acceptable.
Yeah, Popper would say it's a metaphysical claim. It has no, it cannot be falsified because there's no testing that can be done. This is a metaphysical. It's like saying God is, or something like that. You can't basically falsify it. That's correct, because there's no amount of evidence that will falsify something like that. Yeah. Because it's an a priorism. I mean, you cannot falsify such a thing.
And therefore, it's not open to reason in that respect, then.
Right. Exactly.
There's the movement goes a bit further than that, though, because you've now got this. I think it's Abraham Kendi and D'Angelo. The idea of anti-racism as being the answer to racism. What do you make of anti-racism?
Well, the precept there is that it's not enough to be non-racist, you must be anti-racist. but even your anti-racism is sometimes construed as racism as well. I mean, it's such gobbledygook. I can't frankly and reach of it maintain my own mental hygiene, and it's pollution. You know, this is a pathological, paralogic thinking, and I try to avoid it. So some other people delve into this. I do have to, because that's kind of sort of what I'm analyzing in many cases. But yeah, I mean, D'Angelo is a charlatan. I mean, she's running around making millions of dollars talking about how everybody in herself is racist, and it's a complete sham. I don't know what else to say about it right now.
But what about the idea that, and this is as my understanding of anti-racism, is that you really have to, the tables have been tipped so far one direction, we now have to tip the tables in the other direction, and that the only answer to discrimination in the past is more discrimination in the future, which I believe is a quotation from one of those two.
Yes, absolutely. Discrimination must be, they are not anti-discriminatory. So this is not, they're very clear that discrimination is viable, and it should be viable. Discrimination against whites, a discrimination against the white hetero, normative supremacist, the whole 9 yards of patriarchal, all that. There has to be discrimination, and they call it positive discrimination.
You have affirmative action, don't you, in the States? We don't have that over in the UK, but I just wonder, what do you think of affirmative action? Does that work well or not?
No, affirmative action is kind of the beginning of all this. From affirmative action, they just put it on steroids, and it's now diversity, equity, and inclusion. So the affirmative action is kind of the mild, shall we say, liberal version of this new leftist agenda. And yeah, I'm opposed to it. I think it's terrible for everybody, including people of color and other minorities, because it delegitimates them. I think Shelby Steele, a pretty interesting intellectual African American, has said that it leaves a crisis of confidence for every minority person who gains any position, because they always have a sneaking suspicion that they got it on the basis of their identity and not their merit. And so it's corrupting all the way through. Plus, it promotes, like I said when I talked about that hiring process, you end up it could get dangerous. I've called this, they call it diversity, equity, inclusion. I call it diversity, inclusion, and equity, because the acronym there is DIE. And people could die from this. Imagine if your doctor was advanced on this basis, or your engineer of a bridge, or some other edifice that might crumble because it was built by somebody unqualified to build it based on their identity criteria. That's what I call it, death by diversity. It's possible.
The thing that you mentioned is in your book Beyond Woke, and it seems to me that your criticism of diversity, inclusion, and equity is that essentially it doesn't mean what it says on the tin.
Right.
That diversity means something quite different, and inclusion means something different, and equity means something different. Can you say a bit more about that?
Yes, I think, first of all, I've renamed it conformity, inequity, and exclusion. The idea is that anytime you hear the word diversity, this means that there's one viewpoint that's allowed. And that means you must be ideologically conforming to it. It's inequitable because it actually discriminates against anyone with a divergent view. And then it's exclusive because it aims to get rid of those people. And so it is it's a very authoritarian, mechanism. And authoritarianism is what happens is, when you get people into positions of authority who got positions on the basis of their identity, they're very likely to tend towards authoritarianism, because that protects their positions. And then authoritarian states and institutions favor those unqualified people because they become super loyalists. to the regime. So that's kind of how it works in a kind of symbiotic way, if you will.
The words you use about political correctness tend to be quite religious words, aren't they? Would you classify it as a kind of a religion?
Yeah, I think it's a religious creed. And social justice being the social justice or wokeness being the real incarnation now. It's religious because it has rituals, it has dogmas that can't be contravened, and it has metaphysical claims like we were talking about before that aren't falsifiable. So in that sense, to me, I mean, it qualifies at least as a Western religion, right? I mean, some of these anthropologists would say, you know, creedal commitments are not really, that's just a Western version of religion, or even the idea of religion, they say, is a Western construct, whatever. So.
The other key thing, of course, about religions is that they take a moral stand, and somehow or other, the woke idea seems to have gained the higher moral ground, whether spiritually or truth. But how does it gain the moral ground?
That's a great question. It does so by being parasitic on the principles that you and I probably hold, which are equality, individual autonomy, and those things. So it's sort of parasitic on those. It says, look, if you really believe in equality, then you must be super into equality, such that you will be behind and advocate advancing the interest of those people who are unequal based on their race or gender, and you must promote those people because otherwise you're not a true believer in equality. So they take equality, transmute it into equity, and then make everybody abide by the idea of equity as opposed to equality de jure. They want a de facto material equality. They say they do. I think they're actually trying to invert the hierarchy, actually. They want to take the hierarchy that they see as existing and invert it. So that whoever is the most subordinated at the outset becomes the one on top when the hierarchy is inverted. I think that's really what they're aiming. It's a power play.
That could be a definition of anti-racism, I think, namely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let me ask you a question about one of the things in your book, which takes us slightly to a side issue, or not side issue, but a sideways move. And that is, let me quote you something which it says in the back here. And by the way, I like the very last appendix which you put in, which is a kind of set of your statements from Facebook over a few years, I think. And they succinctly, although they move from one topic to another, they succinctly put some ideas very clearly, very sharply. One of the things you said is, first of all, stop using the word gender. The word applies to language and not to people. What's wrong with the word gender?
Well, this is very interesting. I've done a little bit of a semantic word history, or what we would call etymology, I guess, of that term or in its usage. And interestingly enough, it wasn't until 1955 that this word was introduced to refer to what we had thought of as in terms of sex difference. It was introduced by this guy named John Money. He called himself a sexologist. And he introduced this idea of gender roles, that there's a certain set of behavioral traits that are associated with and expected of the different sexes based on their anatomy and so on. And that those gender roles are socially constructed and have to be deconstructed. And then feminists pick this up big time. They're all these gender critical feminists, as they call themselves. So gender really was introduced in the mid 50s to refer to sex difference, what we had called. So if you look in the psychological literature, for example, they never refer to people in terms of gender. Gender was used to mostly in language to refer to masculine and feminine nouns and adjectives and so forth. So especially in the Romance languages. So gender becomes this third term that gets introduced, and once you introduce this idea, then if you start with this idea that gender is socially constructed, then you're introducing the possibility of multiple genders. That's gender pluralism. And then you get to the point where we are now, where people can declare whatever gender they are or want to be, and we have to abide by it. I don't care what the hell they say. Frankly, they can call themselves a tree, but if they're going to act, if I have to abide by their pronouns, and also I have to, this is basically where Jordan Peterson started off. This was the pronoun wars that he was a signal participant in. The idea that I don't care what you call yourself. The question is whether you're going to enforce this on me. And that's where I differ. And I won't do it. So gender becomes this, what I call a gender jackpot, because the guy's name is money. And he introduced this kind of jackpot where, anybody's, everything goes in terms of gender. And now we have this gender confusion and pluralism, and this enforcement of gender identity, plurality, and pronoun proliferation. So, yeah, does that answer it?
Yeah, very, very interesting. One of the other things I found interesting in your book is you do trace some words back, and I was quite surprised to find that political correctness itself seems to stem from Lenin back in 1921, yes. Which took me by surprise. I didn't realize that was the origin of that.
Yeah, political correctness referred to the proper party position, and they had one on almost everything. So anything in the universe, basically, you had a politically correct view. Lenin was an authoritarian maniac, and he really attempted. He enforced this political correctness with terror.
I think the enforcement of the correctness is the key to the whole idea of what might be wrong with it. The idea that it's an enforced correction that you've got to adhere to, and that if you don't, we'll use some power and force to make you.
Yes. You get this thing from people who say, "What's wrong with political correctness? After all, why aren't you civil to other people? And why you just want to be racist? You just want to use racist epithets." No. That's not why I oppose political correctness. I oppose it because it's political correction. It's a way of enforcement. Yeah, exactly as you said. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was Peterson's objection to it, I think, as well, where he said he didn't use the pronouns. Let me ask you something else, because I know you're an advocate of free speech, and I just wonder, are there any limits to speech?
Well, in the United States, okay, let's talk about it in legal terms first. In the United States, there are limits. And I kind of agree with the constitutional limits on free speech. And that is to say, you can't say something that will precipitate imminent violence. Like, get those kulaks over there, kill the kulaks, as Lenin said, and hang them in public. That is not permissible speech. And I agree with the constitutional limits on speech. But on the other hand, something like hate speech is not unconstitutional. That's to say, you can express views that you don't like a certain type of person, and there's no real. And I know you have laws on this in the UK. Again, you can't do that. In fact, I don't know if this is apocryphal or not, but I heard a woman tweeted something about some transgender thing, and was arrested very shortly after.
I've heard similar stories. Whether they're true or not, I don't have any first-hand knowledge, but those kind of things are a concern here. Yeah.
Yeah, we don't have that yet, and I'm afraid it could happen. And I think that I don't think that such speech should proscribed.
We don't have a First Amendment such as you do, which I think gives you some degrees of protection for free speech, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And I think that's the difficulty here. So the statement free speech is not hate speech or hate speech is not free speech, that's often the argument that there should be much tighter limits on free speech. What do you make of
Yeah.
that?
Well, the whole left is really trying to delimit free speech, and to proscribe certain speech based on what they call discursive violence. See, so what it really comes down to is, for the left, your speech is violence, but our violence is speech. That really is what it really boils down to, is that, there was this move in postmodern theory that effectively said that language produces reality. That reality is a social construct, or linguistic and social construct. This goes back to Derrida and his book of grammatology and all that, where he basically effectively says there's no ontology anywhere. What we do is produce these ontologies through language. And so they got this point, and then it came in some legal theorists and stuff start saying that, speech is a material act. It isn't some sort of, whatever, it's a material act. So when you speak, it can be violent. And they call this discursive violence. So they've been trying to get this idea of discursive violence codified legally. Thankfully, they haven't been able to, because I think it would be a terrible. It serves as a slippery slope towards absolutely silencing people. You could say anything is hateful. I mean,
what's the argument against the idea that speech can be violent? Because speech, after all, can upset people. It can even traumatize some people if they're, say, publicly ridiculed in some way.
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I think that speech can precipitate violence, real violence, and that shouldn't be allowed. And I don't advocate that. What I don't believe is that speech itself is violent, or speech by itself is violent. I don't think that's true. And if we start to say that, then the problem with it is these authoritarians will say basically more and more things will be considered violent. Even the idea of expressing the idea that free speech should be allowed is considered violent by these people. This is just the dominant hegemonic white male trying to violently impose his worldview on me. So I mean, anything, even advocating a different idea, anything could be considered violent. That's the problem. It's a slippery slope to authoritarian control over all speech.
Right. Have you all come across the idea of decolonizing the curriculum where you are?
Oh yeah, that's a huge project, decolonizing the curriculum. They're trying to get rid of what they consider colonization, and that is basically anything. Really, this comes down to gutting the Western canon in literature and in history, gutting the Western versions of history, and getting rid of the colonizers wherever they can, so that all things are seen through the perspective of the colonized. And this goes to everything. They're even talking about decolonizing math, decolonizing every field. They're going to the point where they're saying math, correct answers in math is white supremacist. And there shouldn't be an imposition of any correct. So this is interesting. Well, they're very latitudinarian when it comes to their ideas. Like if decolonization applies to everything, and so does white supremacy, and therefore there shouldn't be any right answers, even in math. So there's a kind of a latitudinarian attitude there towards error.
The trouble with that is when you're talking about the hard sciences or mathematics, you're bound to hit up against reality, and reality will hit you pretty hard if you
Yeah,
venture too far outside of
yeah.
that boundary. You don't want to cross over bridges built by people who don't believe in maths at 2 + 2 = 4, do you?
No, that's what I was saying, exactly what I was saying. This was the death by diversity idea that I was saying. Yeah, this is problematic. I think it was, well, I said this, for all those, relativists and relativists who think that gravity is a social construct, I invite you to jump from the 11th floor. We'll then have less relativists around.
Yeah, I suppose so. Let me, as we're coming roughly to the end of our talk, but let me ask you before we end something about the more up to date things which have happened this last 18 months or so, particularly with the pandemic and lockdowns and COVID and such like. Does that at all concern you in terms of freedom or freedom of speech or
Absolutely. I've been writing about it quite a bit. In fact, I just published an essay called Social Justice and the Emergence of COVID Tyranny.
oh,
And in that essay, I'm arguing that this social justice tyranny, which I see it as, has really set the stage for this COVID tyranny. This idea that we have to protect these utterly vulnerable people and likewise lock everybody down, mask them, and then mandate vaccines. So this kind of new moralism where it's not immoral to forcibly object or coerce people into injecting a substance into their body they may not want. They may or may not want it, but coercion is coercion. Yet it is moral to demand it. Yeah.
I mean, I understand that Biden has just mandated compulsory vaccination for everyone who works in a company with more than 100 employees.
Right.
That's how, I just wonder how America got to that position. That seems un-American to me.
It's completely un-American, and it's unconstitutional that he can dictate to private companies. He thinks he can dictate to private companies what these private companies must do in their own businesses in terms of their employees. It's unconstitutional. It's first of all, what he's trying to do, what they're trying to do in the US is use what I call governmentalities, or these adjuncts or appendages of the state rather than the state itself to enforce mandates. In this way, they think they can do it in a way that's not unconstitutional because it isn't the state itself imposing these mandates. But on the other hand, they are imposing them because they're doing it through penalties to these companies. So I think COVID tyranny is real. I just read today that 60% of all the businesses that shut down during the COVID lockdowns have now permanently closed. There has been a decimation of the middling business class. There is
this part of your idea that the monopolies are improving their
yes.
stranglehold?
I think I wouldn't go so far as to say this was preordained as such, but it just so happens to feed into that model. It just so happens that it actually works very well to the establishment of monopolies and the elimination of competitors and the small business class and the entrepreneurial class, in effect.
Yeah. And as well as vaccines, there's certainly talk over here of COVID passports, where those people who've been double vaccinated have a special pass which allows them to go to restaurants and venues and nightclubs and things of that nature. But if you don't have a double jabs, then you don't get a pass and you can't go out and do normal life, or you can't possibly go on to transport like you can in France. Any comments on that?
Yeah, I think it's totalitarian. We're talking about a kind of, this is a vaccine apartheid. It's totalitarian. It's an outrage. I mean, legally speaking, to me, it's unconstitutional in the United States. That is, I think it's tyrannical and it's reminiscent of totalitarian regimes in the past.
And so where are we headed then, Michael?
That's a great question. So while I have a lot of, while I have some negative, pretty dire prognostications, it is my belief that we will survive this tyranny, this COVID social justice woke combination of tyrannical movements, and that we will, there is a kind of vestige, if you will, of libertarian or liberty-minded thinking and believing that will survive and effectively later germinate and perhaps dominate in the future. I think that while I say things are very dire now, I do believe we're living under a kind of soft totalitarianism. I do think that it will not last because it can't. It's always based on contradictions and lies, and that the truth will out.
Michael Rectenwald, thank you very much indeed for your time and for a very interesting conversation. Let me just remind you that there's a book here, Beyond Woke, which is entitled or subtitled at the back here. A comment made at the back says that Rectenwald knows the whole racket inside out, and in this book he lays it bare in all its absurdity. If you thought you knew about all of this, think again. You need to read Rectenwald. I bought my copy from Amazon at £12.45, though you can get a Kindle version at £7.61. So highly recommended reading. Michael, thank you once again.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.